Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first State Advisory Council meeting of the 2024 year. I can't even believe that it's January 2024 already, and that we are already weeks into this legislative session. But thank you for spending time with us this afternoon for our State Advisory Council meeting. My name is Dr. Morgan Crossman, and I'm the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures. And for today's meeting, we are spending time actually talking about the legislative session and key priorities that are coming up across State Advisory Council members and that folks are really prioritizing and paying attention to for this session. As part of that session, Anna and I are going to talk a little bit about Building Bright Futures' role in advisement, what that looks like, and how we actually use our data and information to inform and advise the governor and the legislature. We're also going to have a presentation from Michelle about the priorities for funding of the Vermont Early Childhood Fund under VIPB5. So we're really excited to talk a little bit more about those. And then again, some of the other objectives that we have for our meetings are always around building alignment and collaboration across the different levels of our network, and really hoping to see that, yes, we have our State Advisory Council members here, but also that partners are actively engaged and seeing the work that's being prioritized on behalf of the entire network. The last piece of today's meeting is going to be our executive committee's nominations. And just a couple of housekeeping items before we transition today. If you're joining by Zoom, we ask that you make an introduction in the chat bar. And throughout the course of today's meeting, it's really helpful for us to be able to identify our SAC members if you are able to have your cameras on. And we're asking other members to please take your video off, and there will be specific sections of the meeting where we'll ask you to turn it back on. All right. So as we get moving today, we always start our meetings with a mindful moment, and I'll turn it over to Beth.
Thank you. We like the practice of a mindful moment, especially for those of us who are running from one meeting to another, or are stepping out from working with kids or families in practice, and gives us a moment to take a breath. So invite you to turn off your screen if you would prefer. We're going to use some box breathing, it's called. So if you want to sit up straight in your chair with your feet on the floor, going to inhale on 3, hold for 3 breaths, and then exhale for 3 breaths, and hold that exhale for 3. We can do it again, where essentially you inhale 1, 2, 3, hold 2, 3, exhale 2, 3, hold 2, 3. I'll let you take a few more breaths on your own. And invite you to turn your screens back on. Thank you. And I'm going to hand this to Flor to take us through a roll call.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Flor. Can you hear me okay? All right, I'm not stable, but my name is Flor Diaz-Smith, and I serve on behalf of the Vermont School Boards Association, and I'm the private co-chair at State Advisory Council. We're going to invite all of our members, as Morgan said, to introduce themselves via roll call, but if you could get your cameras on. Oh, yeah, I see the camera. So I'm going to get us started. My co-chair, I see you, Elisa. You there? Yeah. You want to introduce yourself?
Everyone. I'm Elisa Stolberg. I'm the Director for Family and Child Health at the Health Department.
Welcome. From the Agency of Education, Meg, I don't see you. Meg Priscilla, no. I'm going to keep going. Janet McLaughlin from DCF. I don't see you either. Cheryl.
Sorry, Flor, this is Janet.
Go ahead, Janet.
Sorry, I'm here. Sorry, just transitioning still. I'll be on camera in just a minute. Janet McLaughlin, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Children and Families, overseeing Child Development Division.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Janet. Thanks for being here. Cheryl Willock, I see you.
Hi, everyone. Cheryl Wilcox, Department of Mental Health.
Renee Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Vermont Head Start Collaboration Office.
And let me see, Sheila Livingston, I don't see you. Am I blind? No. Jessica Venture, Agency of Commerce and Community Development. No. Susanna Davis, I see you, Susanna. You want to introduce yourself? Nice to see you.
Yeah, hi everybody, Susanna Davis. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, you can. Susanna Davis, Racial Equity Director for the state.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Now our legislators, Representative Jessica Brumstead, I see you. Wanna,
Hi, thank you. Vice Chair of House Human Services Committee, excited to be here today.
thank you. Is Ruth Hardy? I don't see you. Okay, let's keep going. Our private and large members, Edie Gale, I see you, Edie. Want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Eddie Gale. I'm with the A.D. Henderson Foundation.
Carol Lang Goding,
Hi, everyone. Carol Lang Godden. I'm part of the Vermont Parent Child Center Network.
welcome. Sharon Harrington, Vermont Association of Education of Young Children.
Hi, everyone. Nice
Hi
to
there.
be with you all today.
Becca Webb,
Hey, everybody. I'm a UPK coordinator, and I also wear my special ed hat in these meetings.
thank you, Becca. Dimitri, I see you.
Hi, everyone. Dimitri Garter with Global Z International. I'm the business rep on the SAC.
Christy Swenson,
Hi, I'm Christy Swenson, and I'm from Head Start.
Alexis Duquette, parent, representative. I thought no. I don't see. Libby, I don't see Libby either. Libby Dine, another parent. No. Paul Dragon. I see you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Paul with the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity. It's great to see everybody.
Mike, am I right? Hello again.
Hi, Mike McGrath, Vermont Principals Association.
Right. And to our two non-voting members, Kendall Smith and Akira Radke. Hopefully I said that right. I don't see either of them. I thought I was seeing Kendall, but I didn't. Okay. Yeah. And a couple of our members have their regrets, but I don't. So I'm going to give that back to Morgan.
Thank you, Flor. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon. We thought we'd start today's session by just letting folks know how we approach our advisory role on behalf of the entire network, because so much of advisement is unseen, or you all don't have time to necessarily go and watch every single piece of legislative testimony that's happening. So in terms of today's session, we'll talk a little bit about our role in advisement, and then hopefully you'll hear from all of your colleagues about their approach to advisement and advocacy, and what they are following in the legislature related to all of the different laws and bills and things that are happening related to children and families. So I'm not sure who's pulling up the slide share on our end, but as we get that going, I want to be clear that Building Bright Futures, as we show up in the legislature, does not advocate for any specific piece of legislation, proposal, bill. Our role is around convening stakeholders, elevating the voice of families and early childhood partners across the state, monitoring the entire system, and identifying and providing the most up-to-date, high-quality data to inform our decision makers at all spaces. And then we use both of those pieces of information to advise, and we're strategically created as a quasi-governmental entity. So our board, as you are all aware and are seeing, is strategically created with public and private and legislative partners to really secure our independent space, to hold the system accountable to the vision we've set for the system articulated in the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan, or as we call it, the VCAP. And the monitoring component of this work happens through all of our data and monitoring portfolio. In that way, we serve as a nonpartisan independent broker of data and a trusted advisor to our decision makers based on that commitment to providing the most up-to-date, high-quality data. So for those of you who were not able to be at our State of Vermont's Children briefing on Thursday, We just showcased the 11th iteration of that critical data report, which we are so proud of as being Vermont's most objective, comprehensive, data-driven assessment of the well-being of young children and families. That publication is so critical because it is one of the ways that we advise. It is one of the ways that we are centralizing data because we have in the state of Vermont such a complicated system of governance and administration, right? So because so many different entities across our state are required to collect data on behalf of children, families, and the service system, it's not a centralized, coordinated, integrated effort. It's collected and reported in silos. And part of our job is to monitor across all and then compile it. So one of the ways that we do that is through our report, which is now publicly available. And in the next 2 weeks, we will also have a newly updated data portal at vermontkidsdata.org, where again, we're centralizing over 100 indicators across many, many sectors for children and families. And so I'm going to ask a member of my team to put a link to the State of Vermont's children and to the briefing into the report so that we have all of that information for you all in one place. So how does our data impact our policy and our advisement work? And as we think about Building Bright Futures being called to testify, the way that we do that is by first reviewing what data do we have? What do we have in terms of quantitative data? What do we have in terms of qualitative data? And what do we know about national best practice? And I can imagine that you all are seeing the flashes on your screen the way I am. So bear with us. We are having some tech difficulties in terms of keeping the slide deck up on the screen. But one of the things that we do first is centralize and compile all of that data in one place. We also then, depending on the topic area, our legislators might actually ask us to go out and capture feedback from stakeholders. And sometimes we do that in a very fast turnaround way where they'll ask us on Monday for a ton of feedback from partners by Thursday. And we'll do a rapid information gathering effort to as many partners as we can. We'll centralize that information. We'll qualitatively code it into themes, and then we'll present it back to them as a sample of what we heard across our system. Some of the other ways that we might review the information that we have at hand is to go and review the strategic plan and say, okay, how does this piece of legislation align with the objectives or strategies in the VCAP? Does it? Are there areas where we can support different components because we know it's already articulated as a part of the vision and the strategy? We'll also go and review both the current year's State Advisory Council recommendations, but also the past year of recommendations to say, okay, does this piece of legislation align with what partners have already told us we need to prioritize, and how can we reiterate that through our policy recommendations? The other is that we review the emerging issues and priorities that are coming from all of our regional councils and our strategic plan committees as the kind of folks who are on the ground understanding the most urgent needs, priorities, and opportunities for kids and families. So all of that is coming into how we think about advisement and supporting data-driven decision-making. And sometimes advisement takes place through verbal testimony. So a committee will call Building Bright Futures, usually myself or one of the directors on our team, Beth Trzanski, Anna Brolette, or Dora Levinson, or myself may spend time with those committees. And other times we'll just submit written testimony on behalf of our network. So advisement really takes so many different forms. Another piece that I want to call attention to is that as we look at last year's advisement, we were called by the legislature or other lawmakers or the administration over 75 times to provide some form of advisement. It's not always formal testimony. We are asked all over the course of the year throughout many different meetings or phone calls or emails for information, for data, for feedback, for guidance on behalf of all of those partners. So sometimes it's the governor's office or some of our legislative leaders across different committees, namely, I think the committees that we spend the most time in are Senate Health and Welfare, Senate Education, House Human Services, House Education, Ways and Means. And then sometimes we also spend time in Commerce, our committees on general housing. We often spend time with the Joint Fiscal Office providing advisement, as well as working in partnership with our state agencies. So when we think about advisement, overall, we've captured 75 times that we advised last year. 13 of those times were formal testimony submitted to the legislature. And the majority of the topics last year largely focused on the child care bill. S56, H217, we're often asked to come testify about our specific roles and responsibilities. We might be asked about our state advisory council recommendations or how we hold the system accountable or how we monitor that system. Last year, we saw quite a bit of testimony around universal pre-kindergarten education and thinking about what we know about the data, what is the cost, how do we think about this as a system. We're often called to talk about data-driven decision-making and how to hold ourselves accountable as a system and how we collect and compile that data. And we often spend a lot of time elevating stakeholder feedback that we are capturing from our partners across the state. And so the one thing that I want to call your attention to before we transition away from how we approach advisement is that in some ways, the number of advisement opportunities doesn't matter. It's really about the trusted relationships that we have built with all of the leaders across our system who are in decision-making positions and how we support them, and that they do call on us to really serve in that very independent, neutral advisor role where they're looking to us to say, what do you know on behalf of the early childhood system? What does the data tell us? What does national best practice tell us? And what are you seeing that we might not be seeing? All right, next slide, please. As we think about this year's legislative advisement, I don't know how many of you on today's call are already sitting here saying, wow, this session has already gone fast and furious, and we've been called to testify this number of times. But at Building Bright Futures, we're really proud of having been called to testify already within 3 committees. We were called to testify for the first day of the legislative session to talk with the House Committee on Human Services. And then a few days later, Senate Health and Welfare and House Commerce and Economic Development, largely around how we are monitoring and talking about progress related to the implementation of Act 76. And what I don't want to do here today is reiterate my entire testimony, but I do want to give you a couple of key highlights and have a member of my team put information in the chat about the report that we just submitted to the legislature on Act 76 monitoring. And just call your attention to the fact that Janet McLaughlin, our Deputy Commissioner for the Child Development Division, myself, Allie Richards, and several others have testified in the legislature about the current status of Act 76 monitoring and Act 76 implementation, and that the Child Development Division's website has a really wonderful table where they are tracking implementation progress across all areas of this piece of legislation. So if there is a member of my team who has a free hand and can pop a link in the chat to that table, I think that that is a really strong place for folks to go and look at what progress has been made to date. And then the other thing that you can do is go to the House Human Services Committee's legislative testimony and search for either myself or Janet or that first day of legislative session to actually watch that first round of testimony where we were able to provide a really strong progress update. In terms of how we represented the Building Bright Futures Network and our role specific to Act 76 monitoring, we went in and said, over the last 6 months, we have focused on building strong process and systems to articulate a new collaborative vision for how we are monitoring Act 76 and monitoring progress in our system. And we spent 6 months engaging with partners across 13 different focus groups and that we heard such strong feedback about what it means to be successful for Act 76, defining what we as a state need to measure, developing and thinking about and brainstorming all of the different mechanisms by which we would monitor this data over the next 10 years. And so the State Advisory Council actually served as one of those focus groups. Remember, we had that conversation about what you felt success would look like, and then what the top 3 things you would need to measure would be if we knew what this legislation, what success would look like for this legislation. There were over 154 indicators that were brainstormed on behalf of our entire network for what success would look like in this law. And I remember each of you saying to me, we want one. Tell us the one indicator that would tell us the impact of this law and tell us whether or not we were going to be successful. And what I can tell you is exactly what I told our legislative leaders, which is there is not one, but we have gotten it down to what we are calling the Act 76 indicator snapshot. It is 3 pages of what everyone told us were the top indicators that we needed to measure across every area of legislative intent in order to know what the impact of this law was. So we will, again, pop in the chat the full report that we submitted to the legislature, which tells the full story of what we've done over the last 6 months on monitoring. And at the very last page in the appendix is what we are calling the indicator snapshot. And that will show you that full list of indicators. And it's broken down into what data is publicly available or currently collected. And then the data gaps, which is where we really need to spend some time as a system, prioritizing data collection efforts and determining what makes the most sense in the system. So if someone in my team hasn't already, pop the link to our report in the chat. I saw that Janet posted the link to the table, which is a really important piece of how we are monitoring the system. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna, now that we've talked a little bit about where we are right now in the session and that report, to talk about some of our priorities for the coming year.
Thanks, Morgan. So I just want to share a few other priorities kind of outside of our Act 76 monitoring scope of work that represent, they don't fully encompass, but I think they do a good job representing some of our other priorities related to advisement as a network. So first, there's been a number of kind of interesting conversations happening within government accountability that we're really interested in supporting and are well aligned with a number of SAC endorsed policy recommendations, including kind of thinking about what it means to ensure that representatives with lived experience are consistently represented. We also are committed to providing key data and evidence through testimony on SAC endorsed policy recommendations, and through that process also ensuring that family and community voice are elevated. At this point, it's hard to say kind of what policy recommendations will have airtime during the legislative session, but we are willing and able to kind of step up and provide testimony and the most up-to-date data when called to do so. We also have kind of this ongoing process to ensure that we are supporting the identification and elevation of emerging issues and priorities. So things that our policy recommendations and other work haven't necessarily foreseen as things that will be timely and important. But things, for instance, there's already been a lot of conversation this legislative session about after school and after school funding. So again, we are supporting partners, supporting legislators and other folks with ensuring that we are providing necessary data and evidence and community voice when called to do so. And there's just a number of other things here. Again, PDG implementation is something that we are ensuring that folks are up to date on and are thinking about relative to how the projects under PDG are interacting with other parts of the early childhood system and are therefore important to kind of consider within legislative conversations. So again, not fully encompassing, but a good kind of snapshot of some of our other priorities this legislative session. I am going to pause there. We are about to transition into some small groups, but we do just want to give folks a moment to ask any questions for Morgan or myself before doing so. So does anyone on the State Advisory Council have any questions?
Thanks, Anna. So Mike, can you say more about the after school piece so far this year?
Sure, Morgan, I know you have been closely monitoring this. I wonder if you want to speak to it.
Sure. So we have not provided any formal advisement on after school, although several partners across different levels of our system have reached out to make sure that this is something we are closely paying attention to, related to how previous funding has been allocated to Vermont After School and after school partners to be able to execute a range of after school activities. So one of the things that we have noted or been hearing over the last couple of weeks of the session is that after school funding related to the cannabis dollars has been placed into the Ed Fund as part of ongoing efforts to support after school, expanding after school and out of school time care. And so there have been a range of discussions about the importance of mixed delivery related to after school, and also a lot of the similar conversations that we had at the end of last year around how we think about supporting mixed delivery pre-kindergarten education, and how we both preserve the education fund for the original intent for what that funding source is, and how we maintain a mixed delivery system. So I think that what we have currently been hearing is that there is tension around what the original intent was for the cannabis dollars related to after school, and how it's how we're thinking about implementing it and what that means for our system. So I think that, again, at this point, we haven't provided any formal advisement or data on that, but we are speaking with many partners trying to understand the current status of that law. And Jessica, I know that you can weigh in as someone who has actively been engaged in those discussions in House Human Services and through the ed committees and through appropriations through the Budget Adjustment Act.
Yes. Do you want me to? I have a comment as well as a question, and I'm happy to comment on that. But
So before you do, here's what I would say. This
Okay.
absolutely will come up as we move into the small group section related to early care education, pre-K and after school. As we think about our small group sections, would love to bring that discussion there for folks who are really interested in talking more about that. But if you have a question related to advisement, I would love for you to ask that now.
Okay, so I'm happy to wait to talk about that piece. My question is around the implementation committee, and if you have I'm just thinking, I haven't heard an update on how what the subcommittees are, and yet I know that something has happened, but because we had someone from the Agency of Education in our committee, and I'd love to learn more about that as well. Maybe that could happen in the breakout as well. And then the other, the comment I wanted to make was just that when you talked about how you've helped committees, legislative committees throughout the year, and the past, the summer, the fall, all of it, I think it's important for the group to know that also the Summer Government Accountability Committee that we met this summer and fall to come up with recommendations for our government operations committees. Sounds like a lot of jargon, but the Building Bright Futures, and particularly Morgan, was incredibly helpful in coming and testifying and working with me even outside of the room, as I served as the co-chair. And we came forward with 11 recommendations. Some of those very specifically came from Building Bright Futures, and it was incredibly helpful. I just wanted to make sure that the State Advisory Council knew that as well, because I think that that's a little outside of the normal conversation we have here. And it was very, very important and provided truly common sense recommendations that will allow legislators and the public to keep better track of what happens after we pass legislation. And that is modeled in this room at this level every time we get together. And I can't tell you how appreciative I am of that.
Thank you, Jessica. So for folks that don't know, the Government Accountability Committee had a summer session, and they were working to make recommendations to figure out how the legislature can be the most effective in supporting Vermonters and how they can hold themselves accountable to creating change in their areas of intent. And so one very concrete example of a recommendation that we made, or a consideration for their work that we made, was that if the legislature is asking for reports, and they're asking for work done on behalf of stakeholders, and they're asking for things to be due every legislative session, that as they enter the session, it's really important for them to all review those recommendations, that they review the reports that are submitted, and that they actually hold time in their discussions and within their committees to follow up and see what the impact was over the last year, and to really think critically about what they are seeing in terms of the change that they had hoped to create. And so already this session, the first thing that many committees did is said, last year we passed a historic piece of legislation on childcare, and they have invited many key partners in to say, okay, here's what's been done to date, here's what we know now, and here's what's coming next. So it is the opportunity for folks to really be focused on continuous quality improvement and actually saying, did we do what we said we were going to do? Did we meet that intent? And what did that look like? So I appreciate that reflection, Jessica. And to your first question about what is happening in the committee, I believe what you're referencing is the Act 76 pre-kindergarten education implementation committee meeting. And so we can absolutely talk about that in the small group on early education and pre-K, but there is a facilitator that was hired. Her name is Dr. Molly Loomis, and she has already jumped right in and facilitated her first meeting and helped think about the structure of 3 specific work groups. And now committee members are actively engaging in their in deciding which work group they think they should be a part of. And she is already developing really strong systems and process for the work to happen over the next year. So the work groups haven't started doing their own work. We are right now determining which groups we would like to be in, and then that work will start over the next couple of months. But there will be monthly work group meetings and monthly full meetings. And Janet McLaughlin, our Deputy Commissioner from CDD, can also speak to that a little bit later in the small group.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions for Anna and I about advisement or what that looks like?
Great. All right. So I'm going to move us in the interest of time to our small groups. During the next 10 to 15 minutes with your small groups, you're going to get a chance, hopefully, to get oriented to some of the issues that SAC members are monitoring or advocating for in 2024. So we have 3 small groups teed up with a host who will share a little bit about kind of the work that they are monitoring or advocating for related to the topic. And then we'll also ask others to share and discuss in the group as there is time. So first we have a housing and economic security group that will be hosted by Paul Dragon, the executive director of CVOEO. We then have a perinatal health small group hosted by Elisa Stahlberg, the director of the family and child health at VDH. And finally, an early education and pre-K, which will include kind of the after-school discussion we've had so far, which will be hosted by Mike McCraith of the Vermont School Board Association and Sharon Harrington of Vermont AAYC.
So really, this is an opportunity to get your thoughts on what you're advocating for and educating about in terms of housing and economic security. I did invite Erin along. Erin is the director of the TANF or REACH-UP program here in Vermont. So very important for families, great program. Erin is an amazing director. Glad to have her. And just so you know, just from CVOEO's perspective, we've got a long list of legislative priorities. A few things that we're really looking at in terms of long-term economic security for children is baby bonds. And that's something that the Treasurer's Office is really working on. And that is something we learned a lot about at our New England Community Action Conference in Connecticut. Has been really a leader in that. We're also looking at Public Assets has a couple of recommendations out for increasing the earned income tax credit, which is a super powerful tool, as you know, for people with low incomes, and also increasing the child care, the child tax credit as well. Then for us, we really dig into how do we create more housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. That's the key point for us. And there's a lot of work happening, as you can imagine, around that. And lastly, we just have been really advocating for a different kind of shelter system that can settle people quicker and get them into permanent housing more quickly. We run the home program, just so you know, which is a voucher program for families with children experiencing homelessness, very relevant to this group. We have 200 vouchers now. We have 92 families across the state that have been housed who are experiencing homelessness, and we'd love to see that program keep going as well. So anyway, those are just examples of what CVOEO is supporting and looking at, and now we just like to take the rest of the time to hear what you're thinking. And if you have questions, particularly for Erin around Reach Up, please pose them. So we'll just open it up. What are the key issues around, what are the key legislative issues that you're looking at around housing and economic security?
Well, I could jump in on behalf of the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance if this is an appropriate time for that conversation. I would have loved to have been in every one of these small breakout groups, but I did pick housing since we've been spending an inordinate amount of time on that. I will say that having to ensure access to safe and affordable housing is one of the 10 of the 2024 legislative agenda items of the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance. We partner with the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont. The other alliance, the Housing Alliance, we're trying to figure out what, Michelle, I can see you smiling, how that naming gets it not confused with the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance, and how people know who they are. They have a three-part set of policy priorities going into 2024. We're working with them on one of them is expanding housing units, new housing units of all sorts. One is around the emergency housing, and one is around things like services and supports like vouchers and permanent supportive housing. The action has really been from day one around emergency housing, particularly recognizing that come March 15th, and I don't know how detailed to go in this. I mean, I could go deeper, but I'll just say between March 15th and April 1st, many Vermonters that are housed under the GA emergency housing program, but under different sections of that have the potential of losing those housing eligibility and losing their housing options. And there's some early conversation in House Human Services Committee that we've really been supporting with HHAV around extending that. The Budget Adjustment Act does include some language around extending that for for three groups: the traditional general assistance emergency categories, the all-weather adverse weather categories, and the June cohort, the Act 81 eligible households. And extending it through the end of June. There's also some conversation around re-envisioning and remodernizing what the emergency housing program might look like with the House Human Services Committee. So there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue, and we've been trying to support that in a big way. We're also supporting, of course, expanding Reach Up and ending childhood poverty, where members and Erin, we work very closely. Where are you, Erin? On the screen, there we are. We work very closely with the Voices for Vermont Children, who also I know you work very closely with, and who see you as a great partner in that effort to increase the benefit in multiple ways that are kind of deep and wonky, and use words like increase the rate of, or decrease the rateable reduction and things like that. And we're also really working again also with Public Assets Institute around expanding tax credits and et cetera. So I think our Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance 2024 agenda in many ways dovetails really closely with the BBF priorities, policy priorities. And I think maybe what we're doing is we're in a position of working with partners who are taking that action forward and helping to support that action at the state level is kind of a difference in the way. So we work close hand in hand very similar, but we, in slightly different ways.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks so much, Beverly. And yeah, family homelessness is a big issue. Estimates are up to 600 families statewide. We just got a number for our own particular area. There's 10 Head Start families, so that might interest Renee. And there's 50 at least around the state that we know. So those are Head Start families. So housing very important for our children. Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I was just pulling up my spreadsheet of Head Start data, and I haven't gotten back to revising it up to 2023. But I guess my thought, or just what I would inject into this conversation, knowing that from the collaboration office, like my job is to really support Head Start programs, again, to elevate their experiences and working with families experiencing homelessness. Our new director of the Office of Head Start, Kari Garvin, his big initiative is homelessness. And right now, with the under enrollment issue within Head Start programs since COVID, really looking to engage with service providers, make those connections, and really try to get those kiddos enrolled in Head Start and early Head Start services. So just wanted to put that plug out there. I think one thing I'm still, and anyone who has any thoughts is welcome to email me offline, but still very much trying to put my arms around what's the best way to really elevate and focus the conversation on the number of children who are impacted by this issue. Like oftentimes I feel like in the state, in the big picture, right, we're talking about the motel programming and cold weather and all of those pieces. And I'm just always so heartbroken by the numbers that we actually see of the kiddos and all that we know about 0 to 3 and how important those years are when we think about the other safety risks to kids who are either homeless or are doubling up in terms of the McKinney-Vento definitions. So part of the one of the HISCO's priorities, not just for me, but nationally, is around connecting these kids and families. And I'm always curious about what tables are the right tables to be at to elevate those conversations. And so I've sat in on the continuum of care conversations and those pieces. And I know that the 2.0 committee on homelessness is starting to get it together. And so hoping to sit there, but just overall, always a little disappointed by not being able to shine a little more of a light on the impact of homelessness for kids and families. And so just would always welcome, if anyone has thoughts or there are places to really do that work, please reach out and let me know, because we know like the housing stock is low. It's one of these priority areas for the HISCO office where there's not a whole lot I can do, right? I can't increase the availability of housing stock in Vermont. But just trying to figure out what are those right tables, what are those right connections, and how can we really put a focus on those kids and then really get some resources and some energy behind it to make a difference there. So.
Yeah, just really quickly, it's super interesting, Renee, because the way the continuum of care prioritizes, they prioritize populations, veterans, people with disabilities. You've got to have a vulnerability score. Families are in there. But the idea is when you get into those conversations at that table, some people are like, you got to keep the priorities. Families are one of many, or everybody's important and you've got to end all homelessness. So I think and we do that. We work with a lot of adults, but I think the important thing is this is prevention, because we know even one short period of homelessness for a child can mean as an adult they're more likely to be homeless, and research has been done around that. So reframing that as prevention, I know you know that, but that's going to be kind of really important. Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions for Paul and Beverly in terms of the housing, creating more housing stock and the use of current housing vouchers. So creating more housing stock, some of that just comes down to resources and federal dollars. And is there work being done on the federal level with our federal delegation to look towards increasing low-income housing tax credits and other resources for creating new housing?
I think that's a great question, and I think we could send, I don't know, maybe Anna could help do this, but HHAV's housing agenda, which really looks back at the roadmap to end homelessness and takes pieces of that to build new housing. We should try to share that with folks. That's going to be really, really important. I know that our delegation supports this. However, I have to say, and this is a conversation that just came up, when it talks about really trying to reduce and end homelessness in the United States, I think we all need to put more pressure on our delegation, because that's not at least what we hear as much as we should. And with a 12% rise in homelessness across the country, I think this is going to be really active on their part. I feel like our state legislators are on it, but I think it's a really good, important point about how we're connecting with our federal delegation, just from my perspective.
And the other question I just want to ask too is that I know that for some time there's been issues with housing vouchers not being reimbursed at the rate that's keeping pace with the increase in rents. And is that still the case? And is there anything being done at the state level to see if the state can create that, funding for that extra barrier between market rate rents and what the feds are willing to reimburse at?
Yeah, we have a fair market rent ask in terms of our advocacy and education. Don't say rent control. We talk about rent control, but it's got to be rent stabilization, because if we don't get there, this is going to go on ad infinitum, and it has over COVID. It's bumped up after COVID when we infused all that money for landlords to help support people. They didn't not reduce their rates. So we have to have rent stabilization. And if there's one thing you want to connect vouchers to and really help people out, it is to support rent stabilization. I think it's really, really important. That's something we're going to be doing as an agency.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Michelle.
I would just add that the HHAV website is a work in progress, and the 2024 legislative priorities aren't up yet. But I do think that, there's a well thought out ask around investment in building new units, additional units, and sort of expanding the capacity. And there's also some asks around vouchers. Oops, I have a feeling we've been coming to time. And so, Michelle, we can see. Glad to keep connected. And there's a brand new executive director, Frank Knack, who is just come on board the last 3 weeks, and it's beginning to provide some testimony and take shape too. But I don't have immediate answers because that hasn't been my area of focus as much, Michelle, but they're good questions. And I think Frank might be a good person for you to connect with. And I can put his.
If I can, sorry, Bev, this is Cynthia. Just a really quick question. I don't expect an answer, but I am really curious. I was thinking about this from a prevention piece. And so I'm wondering how this fits into the Fair Share for Vermont advocacy work that the Alliance has on their agenda, which is really about building a budget for needs, not looking at the budget that we have and parsing out the pie. So thinking of really that prevention.
As we come back, we're hoping to have a full group discussion about what you heard and what the priorities are, and really look to our SAC members who were in each of those groups to be able to talk to us a little bit about what you heard. And so I know Beth had to jump off and jump back in, and she'll be facilitating, but I would ask, in the interim period, what did you hear about what folks are monitoring, and any considerations that should be shared with the full State Advisory Council as you're coming back in as a full group?
Yeah, well, we had a great conversation, and I wanted to stay in that small group because it was just getting really, really good. I think it broke out into two pieces. Some things like we need right now in the short term, and housing was really key for families. We can't have children experiencing homelessness, because we know what a devastating effect that is on their long-term future. So we talked about it really as prevention, and that's key. We also talked about kind of the long-term systems things that we've got to infuse into our foundation, like the earned income tax credit, expanding that, and other child tax credits. And we talked about baby bonds and supporting baby bonds, which is really critical. It's something that the CAP agencies are certainly supporting as well. So, and then we talked a little bit about, we didn't get as deep, we didn't get deep into this about the rateable reduction, increasing the rateable for the TANF participants or reach up as well, to get more money into their pocket. So for their long-term subsistence. And we talked about emergency housing. So it was a quick, how much housing can we build right now, get going, including looking at refashioning shelters, and then longer-term economics for the stability of families.
Thanks, Paul.
Our small group discussion talked about after school. We went a little deeper on that, and we also talked about reimbursement for the recommendation from the implementation committee for a full reimbursement of a student versus partial for pre-K, which is important. But what did come up here earlier, I think one thing that came up and was important in the small group was the rate cap. And maybe Sharon could say a little bit more about it if you are willing.
Sure, and we did not have enough time either. So we briefly touched upon one of the things that we're hearing from the field is the challenge of the rate cap for childcare programs, and making that a challenge if they are a program that's been in existence and have tried to keep their rates low, and now they have, waiting for this additional childcare financial assistance program funding to come into the system, and now having the inability to raise their rates as they would need to operate their business, especially considering a brand new program could open up and charge whatever rates they wanted. And there's lots of other complexities with it, but Representative Brumsted shared some good updates for us. And I know that First Children's Finance and the Child Development Division have all been paying attention to this and tracking the information more closely, but that is something that we've been hearing about.
Others that were in small groups want to talk, either reiterate things that happened in small groups that you think the rest of the board should hear, or raise other priorities that we should be paying attention to this session.
I can just add really quickly from the perinatal group. So again, we wanted to acknowledge the importance of this period and really appreciate BVF for kind of bringing the energy into this space. There are two current bills that are being tracked that sort of are specific to this space, that are also BVF policy recommendations, and also recommendations that came out of the maternal mortality review panel, one related to doulas and the other one related to perinatal loss supports. So we talked a bit about that. We talked a bit about Vermont's history around perinatal quality and the work that we've been doing as a state to really sort of bring those roots with us and bring it, move into the to 2024 with enhanced energy in the perinatal quality space, both at the statewide level and also at the national level. And then just really a nod to the importance of data in this space, and really have the need that we have to track more data and do some more analysis to really understand what's going on for Vermonters.
Thank you, Lisa. We have about 4 minutes left for full board discussion about any of the topics that you heard about. And I recognize that we ask you to self-select into specific groups. So also want to invite you to ask questions of your colleagues who were in different groups, talking about issues you didn't get to hear about. Go ahead, Renee.
Just wanted to offer a reflection as I hear other groups report out, and then Paul, like you said, I know this, but I hadn't thought of it in so long. It strikes like the concept around prevention and the importance of prevention. And I just feel like since COVID, we've been in more of this reactionary place. And as I sit here in like the 30 seconds of processing, I'm just like, when's the last time we really talked about prevention and like the fiscal implications and good positive outcomes? And so that to me is just something I'll continue to chew on it for the afternoon. But, you know, years ago, everyone knew, right? The whole adage about an ounce of prevention being worth a pound of intervention. And it feels like we as a council is thinking about the whole system. New things are happening and coming up, and we're monitoring and we're doing the work, but our messaging around the importance of investment in prevention as a way to get ahead within the system, it doesn't feel as prominent as it might have a few years ago. So I just wanted to highlight that.
I really appreciate that reflection, Renee, and that, you know, we as a state have been needing to respond to so many different crises level priorities. And so how do we get back to some of the goals of the strategic plan that really focus on all of the different strategies and objectives moving in the prevention space? Any other SAC members either want to share out or ask clarifying questions for what folks are tracking this session and what's being prioritized? All right. I paused as long as I could with my teacher pause. But it also reminds me that we as a state advisory council, even though we allocate an hour and a half of time once a month, that sometimes it may be helpful to spend more time. And I know that people don't often have more time in their calendars, but how do we think about the specific times of year where it's really important to have a longer, more in-depth conversation? And just, I'm naming that for our team, but also for the board. As you're thinking about times of year where you really want to be in a space with the full state advisory council or subgroups of the state advisory council to be diving in on specific policy areas and understanding each other's perspectives, we want to be able to create that space for you and the subgroup space to be able to process and have time together and recognize that 20 minutes is not always enough. So just be thinking about that with us. What are the discrete times of year where you really want to be able to spend more time together so that we can create the space for that to happen? All right. So I'm going to pause our discussion about legislative priorities, but would invite you all, as you are thinking about what you heard today, to make connections with other colleagues, to ask additional questions, to follow up and be able to track and monitor. And we will do our best to also let you all know when we are testifying and what those topics are, and making sure that we are all connecting as we are moving forward with our testimony as well. And one of the things that we try to do as often as possible is if there's a priority or a topic area that is related to a discrete constellation of our board members, we try to reach out and say, okay, what are you hearing? What do you know about this topic? What is your position? What is your entity's position? How do we think about, again, really serving in that nonpartisan space and being able to bring solid research and data to our decision makers across the board? So thank you. I want to transition us now to a discussion about the Vermont Early Childhood Fund. I am so incredibly proud of my team and Michelle's leadership in this area for designing a really strong process to identify the most important opportunities to fund in this first cycle. So you'll hear a little bit more from Michelle Kersey, our grant manager for Vermont Early Childhood Fund.
Thanks, Morgan. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be with you today. So I want to start by giving a little background to the Vermont Early Childhood Fund. As you all may know, the fund was established by Building Bright Futures back in 2021, thanks to some private dollars that were given to Building Bright Futures to distribute throughout the network to strengthen the entire network. And so those first couple of years of the fund, we were distributing $100,000 throughout the state, and we would award approximately 7 grants each year. the goal of the Vermont Early Childhood Fund, it's to support creative solutions that improve the well-being of children from the prenatal period to age 8 and their families. Under activity 6.1 of the federal preschool development grant, Birth to 5, the funding exploded. And so we have $6 million to distribute between now and the end of the PDG grant. The focus during this time period, it includes increasing and providing equitable access to services and programs, improving quality of services and programs, developing the early childhood workforce, and engaging families and connecting them to services. Since gaps in the early childhood system more severely impact specific groups, including families living in rural communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and children with a disability, developmental delay, or special health need, many of the funded projects will increase access for these groups. Next slide, please. So the first round of funding under activity 6.1 awarded nearly $1.2 million to 19 organizations throughout Vermont, and you can see the distribution on the screen. Approximately 1/3 of funding was aimed towards increasing access or helping to provide more equitable access to programs and services. Projects in this round of grantees are contributing to the creation or preservation of 214 early child care or education slots, increasing access to developmental assessments and family supports for children with autism spectrum disorder and other developmental delays. They're providing support for families of children who are currently in the neonatal intensive care unit or have had a neonatal intensive care unit stay, developing the workforce through increasing compensation and training high school students and new Americans to enter the early child care and education workforce. Funding is also addressing barriers to accessing critical services and increasing family engagement for Spanish-speaking families. And it's providing transportation to early childhood education for low-income rural families. And there are definitely some clear ties with regional council priorities. Many of the funded projects address regional council priorities, with the large number of them supporting quality and capacity of early childhood services, care, and education, followed closely by building resilience in children, families, and communities, and the early childhood workforce. So I'd love to answer any questions you might have, or certainly feel free to reach out to me outside of the session. I can put my email address in the chat, and I'm happy to fill you in. Great. So I will transition by handing it off to Elisa for council business. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm gonna try and do this with one screen, see how it goes. So our council business involves 2 votes today. The BBF Executive Committee also serves as the nominating committee. There are 5 seats on the executive committee, and 1 of which has been vacant. So today we bring Christy Swenson forward to fill this language, or fill this seat. And the language of this is the BBF State Advisory Council, at the recommendation of the executive committee, moves to elect Christy Swenson in large member to the Advisory Council's Executive Committee for a term of 2 years, ending March 31st, 2026. Can I have a motion?
So moved, Elisa?
I think that was Floor, right? Yes, okay.
Eddie would second.
And Eddie is a second. All those in favor? Raise your hand, say aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? Not seeing any, and any abstaining. Awesome. Welcome, Christy, to the Executive Council. Look forward to working with you more closely. And now we're going to vote on the October 2023 SAC meeting minutes. Can someone make a motion to accept those minutes?
I'd make a motion. I just want to point out you've missing a Y on the word inventory. I did have a chance to read these this month. Can you tell? So with that little edit, I would make a motion to approve.
Awesome. Thanks, Renee. A second?
I can second it. This is Becca.
Thanks, Becca. Is there any discussion in addition to adding a Y onto inventory? Not seeing any. We'll take a vote. All in favor of passing the October 2023 meeting minutes, adding a Y onto the end of inventory. Anyone opposed? Not seeing anyone. Any abstentions? Carolyn, go ahead.
I missed the October meeting. Yep.
Thank you, Carol. With that, the minutes are passed. Well, that's it. Thank you, everyone. Well, Morgan, I'm seeing there's a couple more minutes left. So before I close it, is there anything else you want to add?
I appreciate it. We never end our meetings early. And the only thing I would offer to folks is, I know that we asked our SAC members if they wanted to elevate priorities for this legislative session and things that they're paying attention to. We also have several other members of the public who are on the call today. So if there are other things that you would like to ask the board to be thinking about related to this legislative session or priorities that you are tracking that you want to elevate, I can leave you the last couple of minutes. Any other legislative priorities that folks are tracking? Everyone's so quiet today. Go ahead, Bev.
Hi, Beverly Bogat from the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance. We have, and I didn't put it in the chat, but maybe Anna can or I can, but the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance has 10 items on our legislative agenda for the 2024 session. I love to see the great alignment with the Alliance's legislative agenda and the BBF policy recommendations. I think it's helpful to kind of be aware the sort of different but parallel ways we go about this work. And I think that one of the things we're able to do is once a issue or a coalition or organization is ready to advance a policy issue and would like help and support, the Alliance steps in that more sort of action-oriented way. We have 5 items on our legislative agenda that are back from previous years and 5 that are brand new. And I just love the alignment with the issues we talked about today. I had a hard time deciding which group to be at. So you'll see, Anna, thank you for posting. I think maybe our time is best used today if you want to click on that link and see what other issues are there. But housing is a top priority, monitoring early childhood, the child care bill, the early child education bill, reach up and poverty, housing, the tax credit, paid leave, peer support for pregnancy loss, the doula funding through Medicaid, and did I miss one? And ensuring that we have a strong information and support and referral system that we call Vermont 211. And also the last thing would be Fund Vermont Futures and Fair Share Vermont, and having discussions and elevating discussions to make sure there's a way to have enough revenue to pay for all these important needs that we have, and that there isn't currently enough revenue to support.
I would just add Vermont Parent Child Center Network is on that as well.
And Carol, if I omitted them. It was not intentionally, and thank you so much for catching that.
No worries.
Thank you, Bev and Carol. Any others for folks who have joined the call? All right. Well, as we wrap up today's meeting, again, just extending an invitation for all of you on the board as you are tackling your legislative priorities. You are hearing that there are some areas where we as a board have consensus, and there are other areas where we don't. And that's okay, but that is where I want to invite you to reach out and connect with your colleagues to really learn about their perspective and their policy positions, and to be able to figure out how we can come into this legislative session and come out of it in a place of partnership and really thinking critically about these issues from all of our different respective lenses. So happy to convene again to talk more about these later in the year. Really appreciate your time this afternoon, and we will see you all next month. Thank you.